Okay, so now that we've sort of seen how we draw international trade and international consumer surpluses and talk about comparative advantage across countries, let's talk about sort of four sources of comparative advantage. Right? And there's probably more than this, but these four capture probably a good 90% of them. So the first one is climate and natural resources. Okay? And so for here, what we're talking about is we're basically talking about geography. Okay? And so if I asked you, why is it the case that Alaska doesn't grow coconuts? Okay, or why do no coconuts grow in Russia, right, or any other very northern country, or how about the South Pole, right? No coconuts are growing at the South Pole, right? And if I said that to you, you'd probably look at me and say, "Yep, that's pretty obvious. That makes sense, and it's not surprising, and I don't know why you just told me that because it's very simple." Okay, and it is, right? The reason why coconuts don't grow there is because their climate's wrong. Okay, coconuts grow exceptionally well in Florida and in Hawaii, right, and among other places. Okay, and the same can be said about natural resources. So Michigan, where I'm at right now, we have lots of pine trees, and so we can export lumber. We also are very good at growing cherries and sweet corn. And so, because of our natural resources, we have a comparative advantage in growing cherries and sweet corn. The Middle East has a comparative advantage in extracting oil from the ground because they have lots of oil. Okay, so here we're just saying, your climate can influence what you can grow, and your natural resources influence what you can pull out of the ground. Okay. The second one is the relative abundance of labor or capital, where capital is essentially, and this isn't totally true, so other people, capital is essentially machines or factories. Right? There are other forms of capital, I'm not disputing that, but for our purposes, we're going to say capital is machines and factories. Okay? And so if I told you that countries like China, which have which in the case of China has something like 1.1 billion people in it, right? Which is 1 in 7 people in the world is in China right now, right? If I told you that China or industries in China typically specialize in using or producing things that require lots of labor, that probably wouldn't be very surprising because there's a lot of labor available in China. And if I told you that places like Germany, where there are lots of machines and factories, or Switzerland, right, or any other country like that, where there's lots of machines and factories, if I told you that those countries specialize in producing things that require factories and machines, that probably wouldn't be surprising either, right? And so here we're just saying countries that have lots of labor relative to capital use labor to produce things, and countries that have lots of capital relative to labor use capital to produce things. Okay. The third one is what we call technology. Right? And here, what we're saying is that some countries, again, sort of thanks to this, right, might be especially good at producing new things or solving a problem. Right? There might be some problem in everyday consumers' lives, and some companies might be extremely good at figuring out a solution to that problem, but other countries are very good at actually creating the solution, right? Building the solution. And so here we're saying, countries that have lots of engineers typically do the design, and countries that have lots of productive capabilities do the production. So here, Apple in California designs the iPhone, China produces the iPhone. Okay, so here we're saying some countries are very good at producing new things, and other countries are very good at refining the productive methods. Okay, and the last source that we'll go over are what we call external economies. Okay, and so here, a question we might ask, or a question that this answers is, why does Atlanta, produce carpet? All right, so it turns out Atlanta, Georgia produces a lot of the carpet that people in the U.S. use. Okay, not quite all of it, but almost all of it, a good amount. Okay, and so the question we'd ask is why is all the carpet produced in Atlanta, right? And so, or why does Silicon Valley seem to have a comparative advantage in producing computer stuff? And the answer here is that that's where all the production happens, right? Which is sort of, if you think about it, is sort of like saying, well, just because, right? But it's actually more than that. But this isn't totally inaccurate, right? The just because, that's not totally inaccurate, but it's not completely accurate, okay? And so the real reason, if you think about it, so let's think about carpet, okay? So carpet uses cotton. Atlanta, as it turns out, has a lot of cotton, or is good at growing cotton, or is near to lots of places that are good at growing cotton. Atlanta is also a shipping hub. Okay, so shipping things around the country from Atlanta is very easy, right? And so what you have is a situation where shipping the carpet is very easy. Now, if you are a, let's say, glue company, and you make the glue that goes into the carpet, well, what do you want to do? You want to produce it as close to the carpet factory as you can, because that way you can save money on shipping on your own and pass that along to the carpet company and thus undercut your competitors, right? So even if you are producing carpet for the same cost, if you produce it closer to the factory that's using it, you can underbid all of your competitors, right? And now the dye companies will do the same thing, right? The dye companies that make the carpet the lovely colors that it is, they'll locate closer and closer to Atlanta. And so eventually what you have are all the things involved in making carpet sort of moving closer and closer and closer together in a place that we call Atlanta, right? And so the same can be said about Silicon Valley, right? All the things involved in making computer components move closer and closer to some central location. Turns out it was Silicon Valley, right? And so external economies are sort of these ideas that say that, hey, you know what? This place started off a little bit better than all the other places thanks to these three factors, but it became even better as everyone moved closer and closer to it, okay? And so these are sort of the four sources of comparative advantage, okay? Now, let's go through some tariff stuff. So we're going to start doing tariffs here. So again, a tariff is a special tax on imports. Okay? So under what circumstances would we want to impose a tariff? If the world price was below domestic price, so let's draw our graph. In fact, you know what? I'm going to use a different sheet because I want to draw this very big. Okay, so there we go. Look at that. Now we're in business. Okay, so would we want to impose a tariff when the world price is above the domestic equilibrium price or below it? And if we remember, a tariff is a special tax on imports. And so we only have imports if the world price is below the domestic price. Okay. And so now, if we're going to impose a tariff, how do you think we show that? Right? The way we show it is we shift this world price up by exactly the amount of the tariff. Okay, so let's do this. So I'm going to denote it PW with a superscript T. All right, and so, excuse me, PWT is going to be equal to the world price plus the tariff. Okay, and so now, let's see what we've got here. Quantity demand with the tariff, quantity supplied with the tariff. Okay, and so from here, you should start being able to see some pretty interesting stuff. And so let's go through what all these things are. Okay, so let's start labeling shapes. Well, let's add in the domestic equilibrium price, just to have as many shapes as we possibly can. And I know what you're thinking. This guy is going to put letters in all those shapes, right? And you're right. I'm totally going to do that. So, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and J. Okay, so look at that. Now we've got all kinds of letters. Okay, so let's get a separate sheet of paper ready. Okay, so let's start thinking about what all these things are. Okay, so I'm going to move this over here. Right, you can still see it just fine. Okay, and we're going to bring a second sheet of paper in. Let's say autarky, international trade with no tariff, and international trade with tariff. Butchered that word. Oh well. Okay, and we're concerned with the consumer surplus and the producer surplus, but I'm going to leave some space down at the bottom. Okay, so under autarky, let's just do this real quick. The consumer surplus, right, if we have autarky, is just A. Okay, and the producer surplus is B, E, and J. Okay. Now, with international trade and no tariff, right, the consumer surplus becomes all of this, right, this whole area here. Okay, so it is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I. Okay, and the producer surplus is just J. Okay, now let's think about with the tariff. So with the tariff, we're going to be paying this price here. Okay, so this world price with the tariff. Okay, so the consumer surplus would be A, B, C, and D. Right, all the area above the world price with the tariff and below the demand curve. And the producer surplus would be E and J. All right. But wait a minute. What happened to F, G, H, and I? All right. Well, if you think about it, this distance right here, QDT minus QST, is the amount of the imports that the number of things that we import with a tariff, right? So notice that we used to import this many, right? We used to import this many things. Now we only import this many, right? Because we've reduced our domestic consumption as a result of the price going up, okay? But we've also increased our domestic production, So domestic consumption has decreased and domestic production has increased. Okay, so this is American jobs. This is reduced consumption. Okay, and so our imports have decreased as a result of this, right? And so now we have only this many imports and we have this tariff. Okay, and so G and H have to be a new category, which we call tax revenue. Right? And so under autarky, since there were no taxes, so there can be no tax revenue. With no tariff, there's no tax revenue, right? But with a tariff, G and H become tax revenue, which makes sense if you think about it, right? Because remember, this area is equal to the base times the height, right? And so the base is the number of units that are taxed, and the height is the tax per unit, and so the area must be the tax, right? But what about F and I? We need another new category. We call these deadweight loss. And that would be F and I. Okay, and so deadweight loss means that these were gains from trade that were previously realized, but now are no longer being captured. Okay, so I is relatively easy to see. So I equals deadweight loss because of reduced consumption. Right? There can't be surpluses for things that aren't bought and sold. Okay, so I is a deadweight loss because of reduced consumption. But what about F? Right, so F is a deadweight loss because of increased non-specialized, or let's do non-specialized production. Right? Essentially what F is it's the increased domestic production right? It's the increased domestic production, but the domestic producers didn't have a comparative advantage in producing this, right? In fact, they had a comparative disadvantage in producing it. And so they use more resources to produce these goods than their foreign counterparts would, right? This is the same thing as saying that, like, look, if I wanted to, I could build a car in my backyard, right? You give me enough time and enough resources, and I can build a car in my backyard, right? But at the same time, Ford Motor Company can build a car as well, right? And I'm willing to bet that Ford can build a car for a lot fewer resources than I can, right? And so this F right here would be the value of the resources that I waste building a car, right? Because I'm not good at it, right? Same thing here is saying that these are the value of the resources that American producers waste producing things that they're not as good at producing, okay? And so we say both of these are deadweight losses because they result from either wasting resources or not trading, right? They used to be surpluses prior to the tariff, and now, not only are they not surpluses, they're not even tax revenue, right? At least G and H are tax revenue, okay? But F and I are literally just gone, right? They no longer exist, okay?